Hello and good evening. I'm Lisa Idris.
And I'm Sharad Kuttan.
Welcome to Consider This. This is the show where we want you to consider and then reconsider what you know of the news of the day. The MySejahtera app was initially developed for free to help the Health Ministry monitor the spread of COVID-19. It was designed to allow for contact tracing while providing users with the necessary information on their COVID-19 risk status, as well as preventative measures required to be taken. Now, more than a year after it was released, the functions have expanded. It's now the main registration method for the National COVID-19 Immunization Program, and it also provides the digital record for vaccination certificates. So yesterday it was announced that Putrajaya will now have to start paying the developer of the app for its continued use. The developer is KPI Soft Sdn Bhd. Tonight we're going to discuss the issues of utility, access and privacy that surrounds the app now that the app is used almost exclusively to manage COVID-19 pandemic administration. Our first guest tonight is Karamjit Singh. He's the founder and CEO of Digital News Asia, which is an independent news portal that covers the ICT ecosystem. Karam, good evening. Thank you for joining us on the show tonight. Now, let's begin with the news that the government now has started paying for the continued use of MySejahtera. What do you make of this news, Karam? I mean, does it raise any points of concern to you?
I would say that it is overdue, man. You know, these guys have done an incredible job. I love the name of your show, right? Consider This. I would ask your viewers, right, not your readers, to consider this. Like the story of MySejahtera and the company behind it is one of the great untold technology stories of Malaysia. But just so few people know about this, and the company and the founders behind it, their hands are tied because you've got them Majlis Keselamatan Negara, under the ambit of the emergency, right, spearheading things. They cannot tell you a lot of things. And I know you were trying to get them on to be a guest on the show, but they just couldn't come on. So the true story, depth of the story, the challenges they have faced is not evident to Malaysia yet, but one day soon it will be, and people will be proud to say that, wow, this is a Malaysian company that did this. So really, that's what's the really cool thing about
Okay, so Karam, so you're kind of celebrating the entrepreneurship, and you think entrepreneurship in the country should be rewarded. I agree completely with you. But the issue of transparency, I think, is key to the story as well, isn't it? I mean, what contract was there with the company, and if so, I mean, for how long? Especially, is there an exit strategy for the use of MySejahtera?
So look, the contract. Look, what I know is that just for a backstory, right? The Malaysian government, some officials, Ministry of Health, were in a meeting with the WHO, right, back in like February or March of last year, talking about this issue and what we need to do. And it was the WHO people who say, hey, wait a minute, you've got a Malaysian entrepreneur, a Malaysian company, right? That's already got a platform that you can use. The Malaysian party didn't know about this, so they got in touch with them. And that was how it came about. There was no sinister agenda or, some under-table, deal, and these guys put themselves there. The government that was in a dire straits, right, because this was a major pandemic, and people were panicking, never experienced this before. They needed to get an app to start monitoring, right, Malaysians, all of us, where we're going and what's happening, and to try to contain the pandemic. And they evaluated a few products, right? And they ended up picking this because there was no time to get someone to develop it from scratch. And the basis of this company called KPI Soft, actually, they have renamed themselves, right? And by the way, the previous name, KPI Soft, imagine that, right? Key Performance Inject. This was a performance management company in Malaysia, Sharon. And they were already had and they were using something called augmented analytics, right? Augmented analytics means you're getting the data at a much faster speed, and it is shared with everyone in organization.
So, Karam, do you think
it is a very strong technology product already that they just ported over. They reskinned it. They reskinned it for this health service because there was a dire need, and they were selected by the government. Right? It's not just one party there. They looked at a few. They said, you guys are the ones who can do it the quickest. Okay, sorry, Melissa, go ahead. Sorry.
Okay, yes, sorry. So do you think that the MySejahtera app is a successful app for what it was designed for? Are you saying, I mean, I would like you to address the criticisms that have been thrown to the MySejahtera app, that it failed at contact tracing, that it didn't have push notifications, that there were lots of buggy issues. How would you address those criticisms?
Look, I think, in the world we live in now, the noisy dozen, have a bigger say and influence than the happy, 1.2 million, since we're using a dozen, right? If you go to the iStore and you go to the App Store and look at the ratings, right? The ratings are above 4.5. So what does that tell you? So this is not true that, this app is buggy and all that, right? And also, by the way, June 6th of last year, they suddenly had 1 million people registering on the app. You know what happened June 6th last year? The government suddenly mandated that every time when you go out somewhere, you must register, right? You must scan a QR code to enter a store. They didn't do the scan out yet. Can you imagine your app suddenly getting 1 million registrations? And from what I understand, the system literally was shaking with that many, interactions, coming in. So actually, technologically wise, the app has done incredibly well for a situation where they were unprepared for the huge numbers. And one quick point, our government, Malaysia, has launched about 50 apps, over the last few years. The most popular app, among the top 10 apps, I think the most popular was an app called MySPL. And I'm sorry, I don't know what SPL is. It was 1.2 million downloads. MySejahtera hit 6.2 million 12 weeks after it was launched. So I would be happy to go online, and debate with people if they said that this app is a disgrace, we could have done better and all. In the dire circumstances, and I think once the team are under the MKN, when they can, because there's a COVID task force, right? And these people meet every day, okay? There's like a group of about 16 of them. They will tell you how, they are thankful they are for MySejahtera, what they've done. And what they've done, by the way, is way more than what they were supposed to. They didn't expect it to be so widely popular, right? It was uncharted territory back in March of 2020, when they were said, okay, we're going to use your app, go ahead and reskin it and customize it for our needs, right? It's totally uncharted territory, what they have done. It's incredible that
okay,
we are not
I get, so Karan,
right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Karan, so coming back to the question of transparency and what we should pay for this, because there is a question always of accountability, right? This is public money that's going to be spent.
Right.
You already in some sense answered the bang for buck question. You think it's been good bang for the but we don't know what the buck is yet. And I think that is also troubling.
But that's only going to be determined. I mean, they're going to start charging them. They're going to start paying them in April of next year, correct? So and I guarantee you the details will come out. From what I understand, it's still early stages of trying to assess how much they should be paid, right? And the level of further upgrades to the app. Like you said, there are some things that can probably be done better, right? And for example, maybe people would like to know that they're about to enter hotspot, right? Before they enter it, and hey, wait a minute, there were 15, people who were in self-isolation now after entering this mall or this office building. Maybe I don't need to go there. So there are things that they'll be asked to do further in exchange for the money they'll be paid. And they've been doing it for free for so far. Imagine if anyone out there who knows the hosting, right, cost that you have to do from hosting it when they were 12,000 downloads a day to where you've got now, I think they're way beyond 6.6 million, right? Probably everybody in Malaysia plus their grandparents have the app now. Imagine the cost they are bearing on the back end and the team they need also to support it. So when the real story comes up, people are going to say, oh, wow, I didn't know that. And I'm willing to stake my reputation on it. Sorry, Karam, stupid fellow, why are you saying this all? You don't know, right? Really, and when you meet the entrepreneur, Ravi, right, Sharan, and Melissa, if you've met geeky people before who are technical, they're a bit of a different breed, right? The one time only I met him and he wanted to, they were surprised by the pushback by society, right? And not society, the noisy dozen in social media. Hey, what's going on? Why are people not appreciating what we're doing? He's sitting across the table from me then, and we both had our masks on, right? This was in May or June. And I think halfway during the discussion, he had actually slouched halfway down under the table. He's like, hey, I'm interacting with someone. They probably don't like to meet with people and engage with people. I if I had a camera in a slow motion, timer, it was amazing. Right? Hey, Ravi, you can. Why are you like this?
All right, Karam,
And-
thank you for being on the show tonight, joining us and sharing your perspectives. We appreciate your time. That was Karamjit Singh of Digital News Asia. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be back with more on the issue of MySejahtera. Stay tuned.
Kes masih tinggi. Amalkan kebersihan yang baik. Basuh tangan dengan Lifebuoy atau sabun. Kuasa melindungi Malaysia kini di tangan anda. Kita jaga kita.
Adakah penyelesaian rangkaian awan dapat meningkatkan hasil penjagaan anda? Dengan Maxis Right Cloud, pasti ada rangkaian awan sesuai untuk digunakan dengan setiap aplikasi. Akses semua pembekal rangkaian awan. Kawal sistem rangkaian awan sepenuhnya. Lakukan integrasi sistem IT premise dengan mana-mana rangkaian awan. Jadi, jangan pilih rangkaian awan sembarangan. Pilih Maxis Right Cloud untuk membantu meningkatkan hasil penjagaan anda.
Berani tewaskan kelemomo dan keguguran rambut. Clear Man Anti-Hair Fall dengan teknologi berkuasa 3 ganda dan ekstrak kopi. Bebas kelemomo, kurang rambut gugur. Merangsangkan kulit kepala untuk 10 kali kurang rambut gugur. Clear Man, terbukti bebas kelemomo.
Hello, you're watching Consider This. I'm Melissa Idris, with me is Sharad Kutan. If you've just joined us on the show, tonight we're discussing the MySejahtera app. We're discussing whether the app has proven its worth. Joining us on the show tonight is Dr. Lau Chia Han. He's the Chief Data Scientist and CEO of LEAD, which is a tech institute that provides programs on data science and analytics. He's also the founder of coronatracker.com, which is an open source portal for COVID-19 data and analysis. Jahan, welcome to the show. Appreciate you being with us tonight. How would you assess the effectiveness of the MySejahtera app if you take into account what it was designed for? That is alerting users for their risk category and perhaps to contact trace. I mean, how would you assess its capability?
I think from a user standpoint, MySejahtera does its job very well. And if you compare it with other apps, right, it's very fast and responsive, and it does not cost too much of the usage on our data, so to speak, right? So, but I think from a citizen point of view, also we need to think about we need to strike a good balance between the speed and also reliability. So a lot of people are saying it is not really notifying us when things happen, but you have to think about it. Say, if we think about the worst case scenario last time when we still have 30,000 over cases per day, and it's really pointless to keep reminding us that we're in the red zone. So what I see in terms of the gaps is that the change of status, right? It will give us some relief, right? It will make us happy if we go from red zone to yellow and from yellow to green, and it tells us that we should be more alert when it goes from yellow to red. So I think this here would be a good starting point, that we see more notifications when it comes to using the app.
Chan, there are issues beyond the question of functionality and user interface. I think I take your point on that. But in terms of the options that the government had going into the crisis, and I know there's a sense of urgency, but what other strategies could have been used? I mean, should we have gone for a single platform strategy? Could we have had multiple platforms? We know there were actually other apps like Sri Lanka that were also being offered. In terms of the choices that were made over technology in a healthcare, in a public health crisis scenario, could we have done it differently?
I think this is the case where you don't want to say, oh, we are spoiled by choices, right? So I think we should stick to MySejahtera, because at this sort of scenario, we don't want to have too many apps, and because they are not sharing data among each other, and they are not supposed to, because these are very sensitive, personal, private information. So we should be using a single app, and this app should tie to a centralized, anonymized database. That means it should have a unique identifier that's able to tell who you are if somebody wants to find out. But for somebody who gain unauthorized access to the database, to them it's just a piece of scrambled numbers or scrambled strings, and they wouldn't be able to figure out what it is. So this should be the best practice if we were to move forward.
Okay, well, speaking about best practices, I mean, if you were to look at other countries, I'm just wondering what their process has been. I mean, how have they utilized similar apps? For us, the story of MySejahtera has been one that was tied to CSR. We heard Karam a little bit earlier talking about how this was free, done for free, and an effort on companies' part, but now the government is going to pay for it. I mean, what have other countries done, and what have you observed to be best practices done there?
So when we look at this, right, the MySejahtera app is pretty much just the front end of the entire process. But what we are really discussing here is the entire contact tracing practice, because it involves tracing the vaccination, the reporting process, and also testing. But like I mentioned earlier, right now, every single process, they are all separated. The data are kept in silos. It's not in a bad way, but it's just that we haven't found a reliable way to link them up together. So in some other countries, a common practice that we use is actually Bluetooth tracing. So it's used to notify, let's say, when the maximum number of people in a particular place, like a restaurant or a shopping mall, they're reaching its limit, especially in a large confined space. And Bluetooth is actually a more privacy-preserving option and less invasive compared to GPS. And it also involves other parts of it, like education and information, educating the public. So these are some of the things that we have observed, and it should be done better in the future versions.
Chehan, I wonder, for us who are not in that space, right, in terms of tech and AI and such, I mean, the cost is an interesting one, because
yes,
from the narrative that we have, this was first offered free. Now you have a company that essentially has a monopoly, working on behalf of the government, but a monopoly nevertheless. And how do you price something like this? I mean, the government is perhaps, and some critics have pointed out, the government's hands are tied. They are now forced into a relationship with this company for the foreseeable future.
Yeah. So a bit about background of this company, KPI Soft, that developed this MySejahtera app. They're actually a company with a bit of track record in Malaysia. They have developed quite a number of HR attendance taking apps for some of the MNCs, some of the organizations, if you take a look at it. So I think what people are not so comfortable with is the process of, awarding a tender to them or not. And also we have some other tech guys in the open source community, like what recently YBKG has done with the MOH portal, right? So people will have thoughts like that. So I think I will zoom it down to a couple of areas. Is number one, the storage of the data. Imagine you have the whole country, a lot of people going out and carrying out activities, and every single activity you need to check in. You imagine the amount of data that is there, to store the data, to analyze the data. And a lot of times that people didn't really take into consideration, it's not about the cost to develop the app, but it's the cost to maintain the app because of the bandwidth, storage, and also subsequent support, upgrades the functions and the features and stuff.
Right. Chehan, thank you so much for being on the show tonight. That was data scientist Dr. Lau Chehan. We're going to take another quick break. We will be back with more. Stay tuned to Consider This.
Semua dah sedia? Jom! Walau apapun gerakan atau kepanasan, Sunsilk dengan minyak argan dan pati bunga camellia membersihkan dan menyuburkan rambut secara mendalam, menjadikannya 5 kali lebih lembut dan harum. Sunsilk.
Universiti Kuala Lumpur mercu tanda pendidikan MARA. Sertai kami bagi pengambilan ke program persediaan diploma, ijazah dan pasca siswaza hari ini. Layari unikl.edu.my.
Layan je. Istimewanya penghantaran hari ni ada Pagi di Sinar. Lawak selamba bapak-bapak pecah perut dibuatnya. BTS boleh tolong sampaikan lagu apa? Terbaharu bersama Dina Nazir lah. Apa kalau semacam je ni? Patutlah. Duo Sinar Hefni dan Elizad memang kecoh.
Saya Hefni.
Kita chill dengan Falik di Arena Sinar. Dia ni memang tu sebelum waktunya. Taklah dia matang. Layan ragam personality Sinar di App Shop di mana-mana bila-bila masa. Menyinari hidupmu dengan muzik terhebat di Sinar. Stream Sinar di Shop, aplikasi sehenti hiburan audio. Nak 17 juta rakyat Malaysia mendengar iklan anda? Layari quick.com.my.
Hi, thanks so much for staying. We should write an eye on Consider This. We'll continue our discussion now on the MySejahtera app. It's been more than a year since it's been released. Now the government will have to start paying the developer of the app, KPI Soft, for continued use. I believe the payment will be backdated to April of this year. Now, what are the trade-offs involved in the route that the government has taken in using digital technology to manage this public health crisis? We have joining us now Jack SM Key. She is the co-director of the Centre for Independent Journalism Malaysia, better known as CIJ. Jack, good evening. Is it enough that the developers of MySejahtera have assured the public that when it comes to personal data protection, that they are fully compliant with the Personal Data Protection Act and the Infectious Diseases Prevention and Control Act? I mean, is that enough? Are you reassured?
Well, the PDPA, Personal Data Protection Act, is actually an act that is already quite weak to begin with. And it has several limitations as we speak. So to say that it's fully compliant today, I'm wondering what that means. Because the PDPA, number one, doesn't apply to any federal or state government agency. So I'm not sure who actually is the data steward in this case. Is the data steward the Ministry of Health, in which case PDPA doesn't apply? Or is the data steward this particular corporation, KPI Software? Are they being paid for the development of the app, or are they being paid for the processing of data, both of which are very different things? And in which case, is this now considered a commercial is this now considered a kind of like commercial transaction that we are having between ourselves and KPI Software? And what have we consented to? So I think there's a lot of gray areas and a lot of questions that we have to answer before we can even enter to the question of whether compliance with PDPA is enough. But just as a baseline, PDPA as a law for data protection is already a very weak law, and it's not one that is sufficiently robust in order to protect our personal data and in order to protect especially sensitive, personally sensitive data such as information about geolocation, about movement, about health that is trackable to specific individuals for extensive periods of time.
Yeah, Jack, I mean, I wonder if many people are aware of what they're handing over when they either download the app or use it extensively in their daily lives. Could you help us just quickly sketch what is it that's at stake here? I mean, people might say, I don't care if the government knows I've gone to X, Y, and Z restaurants or beauty salons or whatever it is. What exactly, is your concern?
It's a trade-off, right? You're saying, okay, I will allow the government to have access to where I'm going and the status that I'm going if the trade-off of that is that COVID will be managed and that infection will stop spreading and that the cases will go down and that we will be able to get access to health. And this information is temporary and will be purged and will not impact me in any other way other than this particular trade-off. But that's not the case at the moment. No, because we are, number one, we're not even sure the efficacy of MySejahtera in terms of a contact tracing app to help us in terms of managing our health service, our public health service. We've just came through, we've just come down a little bit from the worst scenario. I mean, one of the sort of like peak moments of how the nightmare of COVID where hospitals are overflowing and so I don't know whether it's actually been effective for us to then go this is the most useful thing. I know your question is, so what, right? So what if somebody, so what if the government knows where I'm going? I don't really care. There is no other central agency in the world. Yeah, okay, let's just put it this way. Imagine your parents, when you are growing up, knows exactly where you go, who you hang out with, and at any time, how long you spend there, and at which places you go at all times, because they have an app tracking you. Is that acceptable?
Okay. Well, I'm glad my mother didn't have a MySejahtera app for me when I was growing up, to be completely honest with you. But Jack, I want to kind of move the conversation very quickly away from the data and the privacy concerns, but also to talk about the access concerns. So MySejahtera is, I'm talking about the segment of the population that might be digitally excluded as we increase our dependence on this one app. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like, not only in terms of, we don't have 100% internet connectivity access to begin with, number one. No, we are really building, we have a techno-solutionist approach to dealing with the pandemic, when we actually we are investing all of our resources and all of our attention to technology and to one company, when we should actually be investing on health infrastructure, not technology infrastructure. So by health infrastructure, this means, we need to invest in contact tracing that is actually being peopled by people calling you and finding out and following up. These are things which actually has been recommended by WHO as being really critical as part of health surveillance. So it's not just about the technology, it's also about the people, it's also about the processes behind it. It's about building more hospitals, it's about making test kits freely available and accessible so that you can regularly do self-tests and self-assessments. What we know that has worked is the kind of like solidarity infrastructure, right? We know that we have been, the things that have worked is within, like, say, I don't know, in a community, that, oh, okay, this person is, this particular household has COVID, so let's just take care of each other. That has worked. But MySejahtera is kind of like, it's like a band-aid to make us psychologically feel a little bit better. And as you say, not everybody has connection to the internet, and certainly not everybody has a smartphone, and you cannot compel. It's actually, I'm just going to finish with this one point. It's actually, you can't compel somebody to subject themselves to a continuous surveillance system in the name of public health, regardless, without any safeguards that is dependent upon the technology platform that you are not providing along with this compulsion. So that's tak boleh lah. Okay.
Yeah, I get your point, Jack. I just wonder if that's how do they seize it, or do they, do they feel that in fact, because of the ways in which MySejahtera is used and how they could be prevented from accessing, services and goods, that they need to, regardless of their personal position, adopt it. Is there any strategy you would suggest to people who are uncomfortable with the use of MySejahtera?
I think if the government wants to mandate and make MySejahtera the kind of like intermediary thing for you to be able to access things and be able to just conduct your daily life, then there needs to be at minimum a security audit, and then some kind of demonstration that this works. It's false voluntary adoption when actually if you don't adopt it, you can't move. It basically means you are forced to adopt it. So what does that mean? That means that people who are already, who are already excluded, who are already marginalized, stuff that you're alluding to, who are already in places where access connectivity infrastructure is not great, will be facing double exclusion, will be further discriminated and will face further kind of inability to access health services, plus. Right.
Jack, thank you for being on the show tonight. Well, we've run out of time, but that was Jack SMQ from Centre of Independent Journalism Malaysia, wrapping up this episode of Consider This. I'm Melissa Idris.
And I'm Sharad Kuttan, signing off for the evening.
Thank you so much for watching. Good night.